Good evening and welcome to the Hot Seat. In the Hot Seat today we have a gentleman who spent 21 years in politics and much of that time, almost 21 years, in Parliament. Today a cabinet minister in charge of public enterprise development, Mr. Kabir Hashim. Good evening, Kabir, and welcome onto the program.
Good evening, Faraz.
I trust the seat isn't going to be too hot.
Well, you can try to make it hot. It's up to you.
How do you feel after being so many years in the opposition? How does it feel to be in power? Last time you guys in power in 2002?
2001. Yeah.
How does it feel?
Great. It's good because now you can think about doing things for your people, for your country, for your voters, for your party. It has been a long way to fulfill a mission that we wanted. Now we believed in some principles, we stood by those principles, we didn't waver, we stood with the UNP because we believed in the UNP. Now it's time to work it out.
And is the country ready for the free market policies of the United National Party?
You're making a mistake. We are not talking free market policy. We're talking about social market economy.
Okay.
Right? Mahinda Rajapaksa's government didn't know what market they were in. That was the whole problem. You asked them what policy they followed. They didn't have a policy. In Sinhala there is a story. Magema khalisama ageta dagena uge wage yanawa. Actually they were wearing the same dress that we had. What JRJ started, and they followed the same free market economy. And they went even further. They went beyond boundaries. That's why we, at that time, the free market economy was one of the best systems that was there, but we believe that it is not anymore. We talk about social market economy because the world over, money has been concentrated in a few. Income disparities have been huge. So one of the focuses in our government is also to reduce income disparities. So we have a clear policy.
And how difficult is it in this consensual government where you have a minister from one party, maybe the deputy from another party, and we have to bear in mind that 47 organizations, including political parties, came together in this concerted effort to achieve regime change, to make a difference. Even though the war had been won, there were other things that you all felt strongly about. So when you have these 47 different organizations, including political parties, how do you pull together?
Good question. But that's the challenge, because if you looked at the governments that prevailed in Sri Lanka, most often or every time it was a coalition of some sort. One main party taking in smaller parties, minority parties, promising them positions, ministries and agendas, and not concentrating on a national agenda for the country. For once, sacrifices were made from everybody. The president, he became the common candidate. He had to step out of his government and take it on. The prime minister, he gave up his candidacy and offered it to a common candidate. Subsequently, the government, the parties that came together had different political aspirations, political principles, but despite having their political differences, they have come together on a national agenda because you need political stability for at least a few years in this country to be able to take on the international challenge that we had. We were criticized heavily by the international community. We are regaining and rebuilding our name internationally. On the other hand, the economy. There are national policies that have to be set up. For one thing, the constitutional amendment to ensure democratic frameworks are strengthened. Then education and health, to have a national policy that's set in place. For that, you need the main parties together and the smaller parties. There have been snags. I'm not saying no. There are times that people come out and criticize the government when they take decisions together in the cabinet. But those are the challenges that we would have to go through. It's a normal thing.
And obviously, you're under no illusions that this will, obviously, because constitutionally now, the term of the parliament will run for at least 4.5 years.
Oh yes.
So that stability and that comfort is there.
Absolutely, but we are not resting on our laurels, thinking of that, because we think that people have taken a bold step in changing a government that people thought could never be unseated. People made that commitment, they came out, and I think we owe it to them to deliver. So I think that the first year is normally a little rough, because you set yourself in place, you come out with the new policies, make the changes, take on the earlier problems, and I think that we are on course, and in the next 1.5 years we will be well ready to deliver to the people.
Do you agree that in terms of the economy, in terms of these projects and so on that was being going on, that when you all came in, you all wanted to revisit some of these contracts and so on, and as a result, the work slowed down. So does that mean that instead of traveling at 100 kilometers an hour, the country as a whole has got to get used to traveling at about 60?
Well, you can do 100 kilometers or even 150 if you want, and then end up smashing against a huge wall,
right?
Which happened to the former President Mahinda Rajapaksa. He travelled at lightning speed, but he hit his head against the wall in the end, because we borrowed from every mother's son. And then we found that the money that was invested was not yielding any income, or there was no productive increase in the country on the amount of investment that was made. What did Mantala give? What did the Hamamatota port give? What did Notos Chole give? They couldn't even service the loan that they had taken. So I think that, sometimes the famous slogan that slow and steady wins the race. We are by no means wanting to slow down the pace, but we are going to definitely moderate our speed and hit the target on time, because we know this is the last chance our country's got, because we talked about being Singapore and being everything else, but we've never made it. If we miss this, the other countries in the South Asian region are definitely going to overtake Sri Lanka.
On that note, and to find out where we are going next, join the hot seat after this short break. Welcome back to the hot seat, and today we're joined by Minister Kabir Hashim. Mr. Hashim, tell us, how difficult is it to work, or not is it to work with the dear Prime Minister?
There is absolutely no issue about working. The Prime Minister is a taskmaster. He wants things done very fast. He drives you, he pushes you, he gives you the leadership, and I think it's a result of that the government is being able to do so many things so quickly. Because as you asked me about speed, one of the most important things is that the Prime Minister has a weekly meeting on economic policy implementation, on programming and on implementation, and that is what is pushing everybody to be on their toes, because every minister is summoned at one point or the other, and whatever work or program or project that has to be implemented is pushed very effectively through that mechanism.
Is he invariably right?
Yes, of course. It's something like, you remember Lee Kuan Yew. It was like a iconic name in Singapore. There was somebody who had to be the taskmaster, and the taskmaster is usually not the most popular, because you push your team, right? So the PM pushes us sometimes, very strongly, and I think in the end the people who understand that we have no time to lose, that we have to give the best for the next 1 or 2 years at least, that we can't rest, that we have to work overtime. If you understand that, then you will understand why the PM is pushing so much.
Okay, now that you're with us, we're very grateful that you've arrived on our program. There's a whole list of people waiting actually within our network to interview you, so I don't know how you're going to make it to the car. But now that you're here, and the thing that's bothered us quite a bit, and that has attracted quite a bit of public concern, has been the issue of the highways. You were the Minister of Highways at one point, and the issue was that during the Rajapaksa years, the Prime Minister and all of y'all were at the forefront of criticizing as heavily as you could within that ambience the spend that the Rajapaksas made on these highways. And so much so there was even in the manifesto of the common candidate. After you've arrived, you all have, in one instance, re-awarded a contract to the same contractor for lesser money, but with the scope of work reduced accordingly. Why is that? Why? And that was a bit difficult to understand. Why award it to this? If the manifesto, as the manifesto says, there was 90% corruption, 10% work. On that, it was very easy to identify that company. Now you all have re-awarded it to the same company, but with a reduced scope. Why?
If I'm thinking of what you're referring to as being something that happened during my tenure as the Highways Minister, I think it's called the Outer Circular Highway Phase 3, I think, right? Which was contracted during the Rajapaksa regime. And we felt that the rates were far too high and in excess of what it should have been. And it very clearly, a very transparent mechanism was set up by the Prime Minister's committee, committee comprising of 4 to 5 members, including a former Auditor General, including a top retired officer from the Treasury, Mr. Faiz Moideen, who has a very impeccable reputation. That team, who also had technical expertise, there were people with technical expertise who are asked to study and report back on this award. And in this point, the issues were that we could have cancelled the agreement altogether. But as you understand, the Rajapaksa regime had a lot of contracts with the Chinese government. The Chinese government had contracted, had got their president down, had ceremonial functions. There were certain diplomatic strains that were appearing because of certain cancellations. In the light of all these constraints, still the government wanted to ensure that we got the best deal. And there was a legal agreement with the Chinese. And there was also a contract from bank to bank for funding, and cutting off the contract altogether was one of the challenges. On the other hand, also the maximum we could do was within the ambit of the agreement that had already been signed. We had to try and get some concession in for the country. And I think it was wonderfully executed that we managed to drop a couple of millions down. But of course the scope of work was also marginally reduced. So that was negotiations. So I think that we came out well on that. And for example, some of the highway deals that had been signed, we tried. There was no way that we could cancel some of them. So there were challenges.
So finally, we have got a proper, coherent explanation of what we've termed the highway robbery. But you put the record right, and thank you for doing that. And this matter could have been would have caused less hullabaloo if it had been properly explained.
I guess so. It's a communications problem.
It is. So now you've explained that there was a contractual difficulty, and in the context of everything, it was better to go with the same lot. So there we have it. Tell me, how difficult or not, again, has it been this time with the Minister of Finance, Ravi Karunaka? The media is full of these things. We want to know firsthand from you, are there differences between you and Mr. Karunaka? What's going on?
I'm surprised that you're asking me such a question, because we work in the same cabinet, we are members of the same team. I've worked with him since 1994. And as far as I can see, we have absolutely no problem. Sometimes the media hypes up a few things. I've seen things in the papers myself, but you wouldn't have seen me and Honorable Ravi Karunaka going at each other anywhere else. You see, when you play in a team, we can agree to disagree on certain things. We do that in a team. We talk, we debate, but we finally agree to the consensual decision that is made. And we have been working together very well as team players. I don't see any problem with my colleague, Mr. Ravi Karunanayak.
But there are some government enterprises, of which you are now the minister, who have like 2 boards. Recently, only in the last few days, the board of hotel developers, the owners of the operators of the Hilton Hotel in Colombo have. It's only now that this other board has resigned. So that was a very interesting commercial tale, really.
Well, yes. Well, as you have to understand, my ministry was a newly created one.
Right.
It was not an existing ministry.
Yeah.
So everything was anew.
Right.
So some of the institutions, or all the institutions that have come under my ministry,
Yeah.
are those that belong to various different ministries.
Right.
So it's not easy when that happens, because people own their own turf, right?
Yeah.
They don't want other people to step
That's
on.
right.
So suddenly this whole thing, part of it comes under me, and it was a little difficult on my side.
Right.
When I was the line minister, I assumed that the line minister should be able to appoint his own board, because he needs to have people he relates to that he has to work with.
Yeah.
So there was an issue when we found that though it was under our ministry, the real authority was under the finance ministry on some institutions, and there were some bottlenecks in the making some changes.
Yeah.
But this is why I say we are a team,
Yeah.
because we managed to iron it out by talking it out. As ministers, we work together, and we now, in most cases, as these institutions have relevance, both to the finance ministry and to my own ministry,
Yeah.
we make joint decisions sometimes.
Right.
We discuss things together. So that's the main thing, and the finance ministry anyway encompasses almost every other area.
Right.
That
And how do you address this issue of appointments being made not really on the basis of merit, but on the basis of you know him, so you know that you can handle him? But that's almost bordering on what the previous regime did. Will this country ever get rid of that sort of culture?
That's a good question for us. It's let me try to be as frank as I can.
Yeah.
Change doesn't come easily. People don't accept change easily. In this country, even now we feel people are sometimes rebelling against change at different levels. Even the very people who are asking for the change. So the culture, the political culture will take time. Usually key positions are given to political supporters, people who have worked with the political parties or with political figures, and not on merit more but on personal relations. One of the reasons that the Prime Minister thought of the Public Enterprise Development Ministry was to talk about restructuring the public sector, the state-owned enterprises, where most of these appointments go on the basis you said.
Yeah.
So now we are in the process of that restructuring
Right.
program, and we are taking lessons from countries like Singapore, which had something called the Temasek model,
Yeah.
which was a huge success.
Yes.
You have Singapore Airlines, which has 49% private holdings, 51% government, which is owned by Temasek.
Yeah.
And they restructured their state-owned enterprises, which are all making profits. The same in Malaysia, they have a institute called the Khazanah, like Temasek, which has done a wonderful job.
Yeah.
In China, we have seen the state-owned enterprises being very profitable. So now what we've started is that process.
Right.
But the question you asked, will it ever be that you appoint people according to merit? Yes, it will happen. But it's not fair to tell us to do it at once.
No.
20 years in opposition, just in government, we can't move out this culture at once. We need the time and space to take the steps one at a time. But we will do it because we have the political will that we have to deliver to the people who elected us.
one step at a time. We'll take a short break and come right back to the hot seat. Welcome to the hot seat, and we're joined by Senior Cabinet Minister Kabir Hashim, Minister of Public Enterprise Development. So, Minister, this model that you're working at will see Sri Lanka have a sort of equivalent of the Temasek model or the Khazanah model. And do you all have plans to sell the family silver, to privatize everything, to sell it off?
Let me put it like this. When we talked about the Temasek and the Khazanah model,
Yeah.
why we thought of studying those models and maybe localizing what they did in those countries to Sri Lanka's needs was because it was not a privatization that was focused on them.
Right.
It was public-private partnerships.
Right.
We are looking at the same kind of thing.
Right.
Somebody recently asked me whether we were going to sell Sri Lankan.
Yeah.
So I said, what the Rajapaksa regime has done with Sri Lankan
Yeah.
is nothing to sell, but there's
Yeah.
only burying to be done.
Right.
Because it's so badly gone.
Indeed.
So rather than bury it, we are trying to resurrect it. Right? So, but the model, most often what we are trying to do is a public-private partnership. We might always look at the state holding its share in most of these investments, but the management rights might be given to professional private sector management. So that way, because why we are thinking about this is look at the drain on the treasury.
Yeah.
If you look at the state-owned enterprises, there are, I think, the state-owned enterprises annual turnover was much higher than the Colombo stock market turnover.
You see.
See, you can imagine what impact it has on the Sri Lankan economy. And the 5 largest state-owned enterprises, being the CEB, the port, the petroleum, then Sri Lankan, when you take these, their losses have been so huge that the people have had to pay, and the opportunity cost for the people is massive.
Right.
So unless we take serious steps to restructure these sectors, we are going to be in deep trouble.
Are you watching with any sort of interest the development of the so-called Panama files?
I just heard about it. It's taken me by surprise when you see some of the names,
Yeah.
international figures.
Yes.
But the more interesting part was that I only heard
Yeah.
that there were 3 Sri Lankan names on that. I mean, that must have been quite a lot of money to carry all the way to Panama.
Well, I think the Sri Lankan people who engage in this kind of thing, which they undoubtedly did, preferred to deal closer home, like Dubai
That's what I thought.
and Seychelles. And
That's
so on.
what I thought.
So, but I suppose you all are hoping and watching with some interest.
Definitely we would be asking for an investigation at the highest level to look at what really has happened.
But it's a telling tale that there are still companies and individuals abroad who hold money abroad and openly declared, in clear violation of the Exchange Control Act, that has been in operation for several years now. But on that note, and as we come towards the end of this interview will be incomplete without asking you the story that has brought you into the news very recently, and that is Vauxhall Street. Some of the papers report that you've took a very firm stance. You disagreed with an elderly advisor at the Ministry of National Planning, and you stood your ground. Mr. Vasudeva Nanyakara on this program said to me that he's happy that Kabir Hashim has not bartered his principles for anything. In that context, can you tell me the story of Vauxhall Street? Why are you opposed to it? The newspapers of the weekend said that you are blocking a $200 million deal. Are you blocking it?
Well, let me put it like this. If you want to get investors. I don't think our country is that desperate to jump at deals that are smelling fishy and which are not getting maximum value. What happened was that I think this was a contract that was signed by the previous regime. It has nothing to do with any official under the present government.
Right.
So that's something I want to clear.
Yeah.
It was something that was contracted under the Mahinda Rajapaksa government in 2007. The main asset of the Janata Estate Development Board was this 240 odd purchased land at Vauxhall Street.
Yeah.
A certain party had leased it out.
Yeah.
And in addition to paying a very, very below market lease rate, they also had contracted with the BOI to get a Japanese investor to put up a multi-story project.
Yeah.
And the value that the lease rent or the value they were going to pay the government was, in my assessment, far below the market rate that that land could have obtained. And therefore, with the JEDB having huge liabilities, with the state having huge liabilities, and as a contract that had absolutely no transparency that had happened in a previous regime, I said my only position was that if they were willing to pay a market price, a price that would reflect, I mean, close to market price, then it would be fair. Otherwise, we wouldn't want to let go of it. And it was not offered to anybody else at that point of time. But since there was already a signed contract with the BOI, this particular group had a signed contract with the BOI. You know how people work. They went round and started to push through the different organizations, and then this had come up at a meeting where I was not present, and it had almost nearly been approved, or given the nod for approval. So I objected with no disrespect to any official or any person in the government. In my position as a minister, I felt that I had a right to object because I didn't see my ministry getting the maximum advantage of that land.
We have an eyewitness to these proceedings who told us that an official from your ministry was rather taken aback by the Prime Minister berreting him, and this chap was at a loss to understand what was going on. But nevertheless, you stood your ground. Has the Prime Minister relented? Has he told you to get on with it and get it done as to what you want?
I don't think at any stage the Prime Minister was biased towards any thing regarding this. He was clearly wanting the best decision taken for the government.
Did he kind of jump the gun a little bit?
Well, I don't think so, because I was not here during a period because I was overseas. But when I came back, the Prime Minister clearly told me to make sure that the land, even if there was a signed contract, to ensure that the investor offers the best possible price for the land, and to ensure that he offers it to the state.
Right.
And he asked me to go ahead and do that part. So I facilitated that and left it in the hands of the officials to go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for your explanation on that very important issue. Last and final question. Politically, where are you headed next, you personally?
Well, that's a good question.
You're from the minority community and all that?
Well, politically, my aspirations have been for my party to be back in the reigning seat, to be able to make the changes that we believed in. We are there. Now, I think what I want is to deliver to the people who deserve it.
And to deliver the people, perhaps a UNP party?
Yes, to build up the UNP party, but to ensure that this nation is won back.
Thank you very much, Kabir Hashim, for being in the hot seat. We appreciate your presence. Thank you.